The plasma bolt missed my head by inches, scorching the concrete wall behind me and filling the abandoned transit station with the acrid smell of melted stone. I rolled left, the exosuit's servo motors whining in protest as I pushed them past their recommended stress limits, and came up firing. 3 rounds from my kinetic rifle punched through the Krell warrior's chest plate, sending bioluminescent fluid spraying across the cracked tile floor. The alien collapsed with a gurgling screech, its mandibles still clicking in defiance, even as its life drained away. "Contact rear." Jackson's voice cracked through my helmet comm, tinged with the kind of panic that came from seeing too many battles in too few years. I spun, targeting reticle already tracking movement in the darkness, but Jackson had it handled. His shotgun roared twice, and another Krell went down in a twitching heap. "Clear," I called out, scanning the ruined station for more hostiles. My suit's thermal imaging showed nothing but cooling corpses and the ambient heat of fires burning somewhere in the levels above us. Earth's cities had become graveyards, and this was just another tomb in a planet full of them. We'd been fighting the Krell for 7 years now. 7 years since they'd appeared at the edge of our solar system with their bioships and their hunger for human-occupied worlds. The war had ground humanity down to its bones, turning our blue marble into a scarred battlefield where victory meant surviving another day. I'd seen more death in those 7 years than any person should witness in 10 lifetimes, watched friends die screaming, cities fall burning, and hope fade like smoke in the wind. "Captain Reeves, we've got movement in the lower tunnels." Chen's voice was steady, professional, exactly what I needed in the chaos. She was positioned at our 6, guarding the entrance we'd blasted through 20 minutes ago. "Could be civilians or stragglers. Your call." I checked the mission timer glowing in the corner of my HUD. We had 18 minutes to reach the extraction point, and that was assuming the Krell didn't throw any more surprises our way. Command had been crystal clear about this operation. Get in, retrieve the package, get out. No deviations, no heroics, no rescue missions for survivors who should have evacuated weeks ago when the cordon was established. But I'd never been good at following orders when people's lives were on the line. "We check it out," I said, already moving toward the stairs leading down into darkness. 2 minutes, no more. Jackson, you're with me. Chen, hold position and watch our exit. "Sir, the extraction window—" Chen started, but I cut her off. 2 minutes, Corporal. I'm not leaving anyone behind if I can help it." The stairwell was a throat of darkness that our suit lights barely penetrated. Water dripped somewhere in the black, and the air tasted of mold and decay. My boots crunched on debris as we descended, rifle up and ready, every sense screaming that this was a mistake. Jackson followed close behind, his breathing harsh in my earpiece, his fear a palpable thing I could almost taste. We'd lost Rodriguez last week to a Krell ambush in a situation just like this one. The kid had been 19, fresh-faced, and full of dreams about returning home to his family in Buenos Aires. I'd watched him die slowly over 3 hours, his suit's medical system fighting a losing battle against the poison in the Krell's claws, listening to him call for his mother while we waited for extraction that came too late. The memory made my jaw clench, made my finger tighten on the trigger as we reached the bottom of the stairs and entered what had once been a maintenance corridor. The passage stretched ahead into shadow, lined with pipes and conduits that dripped condensation like the sweat on a dying man's brow. My motion tracker pinged, showing movement 30 meters ahead, multiple contacts, stationary. "Contacts ahead," I whispered, signaling Jackson to spread right while I went left. We moved like shadows, years of combat having taught us the dance of death and survival. As we drew closer, My suit's enhanced audio picked up sounds, breathing, soft and ragged, and something else, a humming that seemed to vibrate through my bones, even through the armor's insulation. Then I saw her. She was sitting in the center of a small chamber, cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by what looked like survivors. 3 women, 2 men, and a child clutched in one woman's arms. But it was the girl in the center who captured my attention, held it like a vice. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair that fell in tangled waves around a face that was simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. Her eyes were closed, and her hands were raised, palms up, and from her emanated that strange humming sound, a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. The air around her shimmered like heat haze, and floating in that distortion were objects, pieces of rubble, drops of water, fragments of metal, all hanging suspended, as if gravity had simply forgotten they existed. "What the hell?" Jackson breathed, his weapon dipping slightly in shock. The girl's eyes snapped open, fixing on me with an intensity that made me step back involuntarily. They were violet, those eyes, an impossible color that no human should possess, glowing faintly in the darkness like captured stars. She smiled, and it was sad and knowing and ancient, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. The humming stopped, and gravity reasserted itself with a clatter as debris crashed to the floor. The girl sagged forward, exhausted, and one of the women caught her before she could collapse completely. I kept my rifle trained on the group, my mind racing through tactical assessments and threat evaluations. But nothing in my 7 years of combat had prepared me for whatever I'd just witnessed. "Don't shoot," the woman holding the girl said quickly, her voice hoarse with fear and dehydration. "Please. We're not infected. We're not collaborators. She saved us from the Krell. She's been keeping them away." "Captain, we need to move," Jackson said urgently, his eyes darting between the survivors and the corridor behind us. "We've got maybe 90 seconds before we miss the window." I ignored him, stepping closer to the girl, studying her face. She looked up at me with those impossible violet eyes, and I saw exhaustion there, bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. This was someone who'd been carrying a weight far too heavy for far too long. "What are you?" I asked, the question coming out harsher than I'd intended. She laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the small chamber. "Human? Last time I checked. Though I'm sure your scientists would debate that point. They always do." Her voice was surprisingly strong, despite her obvious exhaustion, tinged with an accent I couldn't quite place. "You're military. Resistance?" "United Earth Defense Force, 2nd Armored Division," I replied automatically, then caught myself. We didn't have time for questions and answers. "Can you walk?" "I can do better than that," she said, pushing herself to her feet with visible effort. The woman tried to support her, but she waved her off gently. "I can get us all out of here alive, which is more than you can promise with that extraction window closing." I stared at her, trying to figure out how she could possibly know about our extraction. My expression must have betrayed my thoughts, because she smiled again. That sad, knowing expression that made her seem far older than her years. "I can hear the countdown in your helmet comm," she explained. "Enhanced hearing is just one of my many parlor tricks, along with telekinesis, limited precognition, and the ability to disrupt Krell neural networks within a 50-meter radius. That's how I've kept these people alive for the past 3 weeks, while your forces abandoned this sector." The accusation in her words stung because it was true. We'd pulled back from this part of the city, written it off as lost, sacrificed it to buy time for evacuations elsewhere. Standard strategic withdrawal, Command had called it. Necessary losses in an unwinnable war. We had no choice, I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. There's always a choice, Captain, she replied, moving past me toward the corridor. The question is whether you have the courage to make the hard ones. Now, are we leaving, or are you planning to stand here debating philosophy while the Krell close in on our position? Jackson shot me a look that clearly said she was insane, but my motion tracker was already lighting up with new contacts, lots of them, converging from multiple directions. The Krell had found us, and we were about to be surrounded. Chen, we're coming out hot with civilians in tow, I barked into the comm. Prepare for immediate extraction, and tell Command we're bringing something priority. Sir, the package... Chen started. This is the package, I said, making a decision that I knew would either save us all or doom us. Something in my gut, some instinct honed by years of survival, told me this girl was important. More than important. She was critical. Get ready to move. I helped the survivors to their feet, the child whimpering softly in her mother's arms, and we started back up the stairwell at a pace that was far too slow for the situation. The girl moved alongside me, and I could feel the air around her crackling with barely contained energy, like standing next to a live wire. What's your name? I asked as we climbed, needing to know, needing to put an identity to whatever she was. Aria, she said simply. Aria Chen. No relation to your corporal, I assume? Probably not. I'm Captain Marcus Reeves. The one with the itchy trigger finger behind us is Sergeant Jackson. Charmed, Jackson muttered, his weapon constantly tracking behind us as we moved. Captain, we've got Krell coming up fast. Multiple signatures, warrior class by the thermal readings. We burst into the transit station just as the first Krell emerged from the far end, their bioluminescent bodies casting eerie blue-green light across the ruins. There were at least a dozen of them, chittering and clicking their war songs as they advanced. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and about to be cut off from our extraction point. Get the civilians behind cover, I ordered, opening fire on the advancing Krell. My rounds punched through chitin and flesh, dropping 2 of the aliens, but the rest kept coming, their plasma weapons charging with an ominous whine. Then Aria stepped forward, moving past my line of fire with a confidence that bordered on suicidal. She raised her hands, and that humming sound began again, lower this time, deeper, resonating in my chest like a second heartbeat. The air shimmered, and I watched in stunned disbelief as the advancing Krell simply stopped, frozen in mid-stride, as if time itself had paused. Move, Aria said through gritted teeth, her body trembling with effort. I can't hold them long. We didn't need to be told twice. Jackson and I grabbed the civilians, practically carrying the slower ones, while Chen provided covering fire from the exit. We ran through the frozen tableau of alien warriors, their weapons still glowing with unreleased energy, their mandibles locked open in silent war cries. It was the most surreal experience of my life, and I'd seen plenty of surreal things in this war. We made it to the exit with seconds to spare. The moment we cleared the threshold, Aria released whatever force she'd been holding, and the sound of plasma fire and Krell screams filled the air behind us. Chen sealed the blast door, and we were running through the ruins toward the extraction point, our dropship already visible as a dark shape against the smoke-filled sky. The dropship's engines screamed as we threw ourselves aboard, the pilot not waiting for confirmation before lifting off. Plasma fire streaked past our hull, the Krell ground forces making one last desperate attempt to bring us down, but we were already climbing too fast, too high, leaving the ruined city behind in a landscape of fire and ash. I collapsed against the bulkhead, my armor's systems finally allowing me to feel the exhaustion that had been building for hours, and watched Aria as she settled the civilians into crash seats with gentle efficiency. She moved with a grace that seemed impossible given what she'd just done, showing no sign of the tremendous effort I'd witnessed moments ago. The child had stopped crying, staring at Aria with wide, trusting eyes, and I found myself wondering what kind of person could maintain such composure in the middle of hell. Most civilians we extracted were broken, traumatized shells who'd seen too much death. Aria seemed different, as if the horror had touched her, but failed to break whatever core of strength existed within. "Command's going to want answers," Jackson said, sliding into the seat beside me. He'd removed his helmet, revealing a face lined with stress and premature age. At 32, he looked 50. The war did that to people. "What do we tell them?" "The truth," I replied, watching Aria interact with the rescued civilians. "That we found something that might actually matter in this fight." "You think she's the real deal? I mean, what we saw down there?" Jackson trailed off, struggling to articulate what had defied all logic and physics. "That wasn't tech, Captain. That was something else." I knew what he meant. I'd seen plenty of advanced technology in this war, weapons and armor and ships that would have seemed like magic to our ancestors. But what Aria had done was fundamentally different. It had felt organic, natural, as if she'd simply asked reality to bend and reality had obliged. The thought terrified me more than any Krell warrior ever had. "Get some rest," I told Jackson. "We'll be at Firebase Echo in 20 minutes, and then the real questions begin." He nodded and closed his eyes, but I knew he wouldn't sleep. None of us slept well anymore, not with the dreams that came when you'd killed as many living beings as we had, not with the faces of the dead haunting every moment of peace. I'd lost count of how many Krell I'd killed, stopped thinking of them as living creatures, and started thinking of them as targets, threats, problems to be solved with bullets and explosives. It was the only way to stay sane in an insane war. Aria moved down the dropship's interior and settled into the seat across from me, those violet eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Up close, I could see the details I'd missed in the darkness, the faint scars on her hands, the way her hair had been crudely cut with a knife, the hollow hunger in her cheeks that spoke of too many missed meals. "You're wondering if I'm human?" she said, not a question, but a statement of fact. "Are you?" I asked bluntly. There was no point in dancing around it. "Genetically? Yes. Practically? That's complicated." She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "I was part of a program before the war. Project Prometheus, they called it. The military was experimenting with genetic enhancement, trying to create soldiers who could interface directly with advanced technology, who could process information faster, react quicker, survive longer. I was subject 17 out of 37 test cases." The way she said it, clinical and detached, made my skin crawl. I'd heard rumors of black projects during the early years of the war, desperate attempts to create super soldiers who could match the Krell's natural advantages, but I'd always dismissed them as paranoid fantasy. Apparently, I'd been wrong. "What happened to the others?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Most died during the enhancement process, the ones who survived." She opened her eyes, and I saw pain there, deep and raw. "Let's just say the side effects were worse than advertised. Some went insane. Some developed cancers that ate them alive within months. Some gained abilities they couldn't control and had to be contained. I was one of the lucky ones, if you can call it luck. The telekinesis, the Krell disruption, those were planned? The telekinesis was expected, though not to this degree. The Krell disruption was a surprise bonus that only manifested after the invasion began. Turns out their neural networks operate on frequencies I can sense and manipulate. Made me very valuable very quickly. Her voice was bitter, laced with resentment. I spent the first 3 years of the war in a lab, being studied, poked, prodded, asked to demonstrate my abilities over and over while scientists took notes and generals made plans. "Why'd they let you go?" Jackson asked from beside me, apparently not as asleep as I'd thought. Aria's laugh was sharp and humorless. "They didn't. I left, walked through 6 levels of security, disabled every electronic lock and guard station between my cell and freedom, and disappeared into the chaos of the war. That was 8 months ago. I've been moving through the occupied zones ever since, helping survivors where I could, staying ahead of both the Krell and the retrieval team's command kept sending after me." I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with what I'd witnessed. If she was telling the truth, and I had no reason to doubt her given what I'd seen, then Aria represented something unprecedented. A weapon that had chosen to stop being a weapon, a tool that had declared its own autonomy. "Why help those people?" I asked. "Why not just disappear completely, find somewhere safe and ride out the war?" "Because there is nowhere safe, Captain," she replied softly. "This war isn't just about territory or resources. The Krell aren't invaders, they're colonizers. They don't want to conquer Earth. They want to transform it, reshape it into something that serves their biology. Every day we delay them is another day humanity has to find a solution, to survive, to fight back. I couldn't just hide while people died." Her words struck something deep inside me, resonating with the same stubborn refusal to give up that had kept me fighting long past the point when logic said we'd lost. The war had ground on for 7 years, and we were losing, slowly but inevitably. Every battle was a desperate holding action, every victory Pyrrhic, every day a struggle just to maintain the territory we still held. Firebase Echo appeared through the smoke and clouds like a fortress from some ancient war. All concrete bunkers and defensive batteries clustered around a landing zone, scarred by countless dropship touchdowns. We came in hot, the pilot bringing us down with the kind of aggressive maneuvering that spoke of too many close calls with Krell anti-air fire. And the moment our skids hit the ground, armed soldiers surrounded the craft. They weren't taking chances, not with an unscheduled extraction carrying unknown cargo. Colonel Sarah Chen, apparently there was a relation after all, was waiting at the base of the ramp, her weathered face set in the expression of perpetual irritation that seemed to be standard issue for senior officers these days. She was 53, but looked 70, the war having carved deep lines around her eyes and mouth, her grey hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. I'd served under her command for 3 years and had learned to respect both her tactical brilliance and her complete intolerance for anything resembling incompetence. "Captain Reeves," she said as I descended the ramp, her voice carrying the flat tone that meant I was already in trouble. "You were supposed to retrieve intelligence data from the abandoned research facility in Sector 7. Instead, you bring me refugees and waste valuable resources on an unauthorized rescue operation. This should be interesting." "Ma'am, with respect, I found something more important than data," I replied, gesturing back toward the dropship where Aria was helping the civilians disembark. "Something that could change the entire course of this war." Colonel Chen's eyes narrowed as she watched Aria step into the light, and I saw recognition flash across her face, quickly followed by something that might have been fear or might have been hope. With Chen, it was always hard to tell the difference. Subject 17, she breathed, the words barely audible. Jesus Christ, Marcus, do you have any idea what you've brought back here? A person who can disrupt Krell neural networks and apparently bend physics to her will, I replied. Seemed like it might be useful. Useful? Chen laughed, a sound devoid of humor. She's the most classified project in the entire defense force, had half the generals in command fighting over who got to control her, and when she disappeared, they quietly shelved the entire program and pretended it never existed. And you just waltzed in here with her like you found a lost puppy. Aria had reached us now, the civilians being shepherded away by medical personnel for processing and treatment. She stood between Chen and me, her posture relaxed but alert, and I noticed the way the soldiers around us had unconsciously taken a step back, as if they could sense the danger she represented. "Colonel?" Aria said with a slight nod, her voice neutral. "It's been a while. How's the retirement plan working out?" "Oh, wait. That's right. There are no retirements anymore, just different ways of dying." "You left a lot of angry people behind, 17, Chen replied, using the designation like a weapon. "People who invested considerable resources in creating you, who expected a return on that investment." "I'm not property, Colonel. I'm a person. The fact that you keep using a subject number instead of my name proves exactly why I left." Aria's eyes flashed with anger, the first real emotion I'd seen from her beyond exhaustion. "I didn't volunteer to be torn apart and rebuilt at the genetic level. I was conscripted, experimented on, and treated like a particularly interesting lab rat. Forgive me if I don't feel obligated to a government that never asked my permission to turn me into whatever I am now." The tension between them was thick enough to cut, and I found myself stepping forward before I'd consciously decided to intervene. "Ma'am, whatever history exists here, the fact remains that Aria, Subject 17, whatever you want to call her, represents a tactical asset we desperately need. The Krell are pushing closer every day. We're losing ground on every front. And if she can do even half of what I witnessed in that transit station, she could turn the tide." Chen stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then sighed deeply. "Conference room, both of you. Now. And Reeves, you'd better hope what you have to say is worth the headache you've just created, because I've got about 6 different departments who are going to lose their minds when they find out she's back." The conference room was a windowless box deep in the Firebase's command center, the walls lined with maps and tactical displays showing the slow erosion of human-held territory across the globe. We'd started the war controlling 90% of the planet's surface. 7 years later, we were down to 42% and falling. The math was simple and brutal. At current rates, humanity would be extinct or enslaved within another 5 years. "Show me," Chen said, pulling up a holographic display. "Show me exactly what she can do." I walked through the encounter in the transit station, using the combat footage from my helmet cam to illustrate the frozen Krell, warriors, the floating debris, the way Aria had held back a dozen trained killers with nothing but her mind. Chen watched in silence, her face growing progressively paler as the implications became clear. "How much energy does it take?" she asked Aria directly. "How long can you maintain that kind of control?" "Depends on the number of targets and the complexity of the manipulation," Aria replied, her tone clinical now, falling back into the pattern of the lab subject she'd once been. "A dozen Krell, simple stasis field, maybe 2 minutes before neural fatigue sets in. More than that, and I risk blackouts, seizures, or worse. The telekinesis is less draining. I could keep those objects floating for hours if needed. But the neural disruption is the real weapon. I can feel the Krell's communication networks, their hive-mind connections, and I can introduce noise, static, confusion. Done right, I can turn an organized assault into chaos. Chen leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming on the table in the way that meant she was processing variables and calculating odds. "There's an operation," she said finally. "Something Command has been planning for months, but couldn't execute because the risk was too high. A strike at one of the Krell's primary hive ships, currently grounded in what used to be Chicago for repairs and reprovisioning. Intelligence suggests it's a command vessel, coordinating Krell forces across the entire North American continent. If we could destroy it, we could throw their entire operation into disarray, buy ourselves months, maybe years." "What's the catch?" I asked, because there was always a catch. "The ship is protected by approximately 5,000 Krell warriors, multiple defensive emplacements, and a neural network so tightly coordinated that any assault team gets detected and eliminated before they can get within a mile of the target. We'd need to disable that network, create a window of confusion long enough for a strike team to penetrate the defenses and plant nuclear charges at the ship's core." The silence that followed Chen's words was heavy with implication. She was proposing a suicide mission, the kind of operation that got planned in desperation and executed by people who'd already accepted they were dead. I'd been on enough of those to recognize the signs, the careful way she avoided making eye contact, the slight tension in her shoulders that suggested she knew exactly how insane this sounded. "You want to use me as a weapon again?" Aria said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made my chest tighten. Not anger, not fear, but a weary resignation that spoke of choices made and remade until the weight of them became unbearable. "Walk me into the heart of enemy territory, have me burn myself out disrupting their network while your soldiers plant bombs and run. It's elegant, I'll give you that. Efficient." "It's necessary," Chen replied, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded almost apologetic. "Aria, I'm not going to lie to you or dress this up as something noble. We're losing this war. Every projection, every analysis, every piece of intelligence we gather points to the same conclusion. Humanity has maybe 3 years left before the Krell achieve total dominance. After that, it's just a matter of time before they finish reshaping the planet, and we're either extinct or reduced to scattered survivors, hiding in whatever holes they haven't bothered to fill in yet." She pulled up a series of images on the holographic display, and I felt my stomach drop. They showed Krell terraforming in progress, entire landscapes transformed into alien ecosystems. The air composition changed, the temperature raised, the very biology of Earth altered to suit the invaders. In one image, what had once been the Amazon rainforest was now a sprawling fungal garden, bioluminescent growths the size of skyscrapers pulsing with eerie light. In another, the Mediterranean Sea had been converted into a breeding ground, its waters thick with Krell larvae and the organic ships they would eventually pilot. "This is what we're fighting," Chen continued. "Not just an invasion, but the complete erasure of everything that makes this planet ours. And we're running out of options, out of time, out of everything except the will to keep fighting and the hope that maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to turn this around." Aria studied the images, her violet eyes reflecting the alien landscape in their depths, and I watched the play of emotions across her face. Horror, sadness, and something else. Something that looked like determination, hardening into resolve. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want guarantees. No more experiments, no more attempts to replicate what was done to me. The Prometheus files get destroyed. Every sample, every piece of data. I won't be responsible for creating more people like me, more weapons who have to choose between their humanity and their purpose. Done, Chen said without hesitation. You have my word, for whatever that's worth these days. And I want Captain Reeves to lead the strike team. Aria turned to look at me, and I saw something in her expression that I couldn't quite interpret. He came back for civilians when he could have left us behind. That means something. If I'm going to trust anyone with my life, it's going to be someone who still remembers that saving people matters. I opened my mouth to protest, to point out that I was a line officer, not a special operations commander, that I had no experience with the kind of surgical strike Chen was describing, but the colonel cut me off with a raised hand. Actually, that works perfectly, she said. I was going to assign you anyway, Marcus. You've got the combat experience. You know how to think on your feet. And more importantly, you've already seen what she can do. You won't hesitate or second guess when things go sideways. When, not if, I noted dryly. In my experience, operations like this always go sideways. It's just a matter of how badly and whether you can adapt fast enough to survive. Chen began pulling up tactical maps of Chicago, or what was left of it. You'll have 72 hours to assemble a team, review the intelligence, and prepare. The Krell ship is scheduled to complete its repairs in 96 hours, which means we have a narrow window before it lifts off and the opportunity is lost. The next 3 days blurred together in a frenzy of preparation and planning. I handpicked a team of 12, veterans all, people I'd fought beside and knew I could trust when everything went to hell. Jackson was my second in command, because despite his nervous energy, he was one of the most reliable soldiers I'd ever known. Chen, Corporal Chen, not the colonel, signed on as our communications specialist, her steady presence a counterweight to Jackson's anxiety. The rest were specialists, demolitions, heavy weapons, medical, the kind of diverse skill set you needed when planning to assault an alien command ship defended by thousands of hostile warriors. Aria spent most of those 3 days in isolation, working with the Firebase's medical team to ensure she was in peak condition for what was coming. I caught glimpses of her in the corridors, always surrounded by scientists and doctors, and each time our eyes met, I saw the weight of what we were planning settling more heavily on her shoulders. She was putting herself back in the cage she'd escaped from, volunteering to become a weapon again, and the cost of that choice was written in the tension of her jaw and the shadows under her eyes. On the second night, I found her on the Firebase's observation deck, a small platform that offered a view of the surrounding devastation. The city that had once sprawled here was now a monument to destruction, buildings reduced to skeletal frames, streets cratered and broken, the distant glow of Krell encampments painting the horizon in shades of toxic green. "Can't sleep?" I asked, joining her at the railing. "Sleep's overrated," she replied with a slight smile. "Besides, I wanted to see the stars one more time before we do this, just in case." I looked up at the night sky, and for the first time in months, I actually saw it. Not as a tactical consideration, not as a source of threats or orbital bombardments, but simply as the vast expanse of space that humanity had once dreamed of exploring. We'd been reaching for the stars when the Krell arrived and dragged us back down into the mud. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. "Chen would understand if you backed out. Hell, I'd understand." "Would you?" Aria turned to face me fully, and in the darkness, her violet eyes seemed to glow with their own internal light. "Would you really understand if I chose my own safety over the chance to save millions of lives?" Because I don't think you would, Captain. I think you'd do exactly what I'm doing. Consequences. Be damned. Because that's who you are. That's who we both are. People who can't look away from suffering, who can't choose comfort over duty. She was right, and we both knew it. I'd spent 7 years throwing myself at impossible odds, taking risks that should have killed me a dozen times over, all because the alternative was standing aside while others died. It was a curse and a calling wrapped together, the kind of burden that marked you as either a hero or a fool, depending on whether you survived long enough to make the distinction matter. My wife left me in the 3rd year of the war, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I never talked about Rebecca, never allowed myself to think about the life I'd lost along with everything else. She said I'd chosen the war over her, that I was more married to death than I'd ever been to her. Maybe she was right. I kept volunteering for missions, kept putting myself in harm's way, and eventually, she couldn't watch anymore. Sent me divorce papers through military channels and moved to one of the evacuation zones in South America. Aria was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected confession. Do you regret it? The choice you made? Every single day, I admitted. But I'd make it again, because the alternative is being the kind of person who could live with himself while others fought and died. I'm not built that way. Neither are you, apparently. We're a pair of broken toys, aren't we? She said, with a laugh that held more pain than humor. Too damaged to quit, too stubborn to accept that maybe the world doesn't need our martyrdom. The world might not need it, but humanity does. Someone has to stand on the wall, has to be willing to bleed so others don't have to. I turned to face her, studying her profile in the starlight. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Not because of what you can do, but because it's nice to meet someone who understands the cost of choosing to fight. She reached out then, her hand finding mine on the railing, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through me. Her skin was warm, despite the cold night air, and I could feel a faint vibration, like standing next to high-voltage equipment, the energy that lived inside her making itself known through simple touch. Promise me something, she said softly. If this goes wrong, if I can't maintain the disruption long enough, don't hesitate. Get your team out and complete the mission. Don't risk everything trying to save me. That's not a promise I can make, I replied honestly. I don't leave people behind. It's a character flaw. It's going to get you killed one day. Probably. But at least I'll die as myself, not as the person the war wanted me to become. We stood there in comfortable silence, hands touching, watching the stars and the distant fires. Two people who'd been shaped by violence into weapons that refused to accept their purpose. In another life, another time, maybe we could have been different people. Could have met in a coffee shop or at a party. Could have fallen in love slowly and built something lasting. But this was the world we had, and these were the roles we'd been cast in, and all we could do was play them out to whatever end awaited us. The morning of the operation arrived with the kind of grey, oppressive sky that seemed to mirror the weight in my chest. The team assembled in the briefing room one final time, going over the plan with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that came from knowing your life depended on getting every step right. The insertion would be by low-altitude stealth craft, dropping us 3 miles from the target in what intel suggested was a dead zone in the Krell patrol patterns. From there, we'd move on foot through the ruins, using Aria's ability to sense Krell neural networks to avoid contact until we reached the optimal position for her disruption field. Once she activated her abilities, we'd have a window, maybe 10 minutes, maybe less, to fight our way to the hive ship, plant the nuclear charges deep in its organic core structure, and extract before detonation. Simple in theory, suicidal in practice. Exactly the kind of operation that made seasoned soldiers check their wills and write final letters home. Remember, Colonel Chen addressed the assembled team, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd sent countless soldiers to their deaths and bore the weight of each one. You're not trying to win a battle here. You're trying to deliver one devastating blow that will cripple the Krell's command structure and buy humanity time to regroup. Every second you survive after the disruption field activates is a gift. Use it wisely. The flight to the insertion point was tense and silent, each member of the team locked in their own thoughts and rituals. Jackson checked his weapons for the 15th time, the mechanical process clearly soothing his nerves. Corporal Chen reviewed communication protocols, ensuring she could maintain contact through the Krell jamming. The demolitions specialist, a woman named Rodriguez, no relation to the one we'd lost, sat with her eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Aria sat beside me, her hands resting calmly in her lap, and I marveled at her composure. She was about to walk into a nightmare, to burn herself out disrupting thousands of alien minds, and she looked more at peace than I'd ever seen her. Maybe that was what acceptance looked like. The moment when you stopped fighting fate and embraced whatever end it had in store. "You're staring," she said without opening her eyes, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Sorry. Just wondering what you're thinking about." "Honestly, ice cream. There was this place near where I grew up, made the best strawberry ice cream I'd ever tasted. I was thinking about how much I'd like to taste it one more time, how much I'd like to experience something simple and sweet and uncomplicated by war or duty or sacrifice." She opened her eyes and looked at me. "Stupid, isn't it? Facing possible death and all I can think about is ice cream." "Not stupid at all," I replied. "It's the small things that keep us human, the memories of what we're fighting to preserve. When this is over, if we survive, you're taking me to get ice cream," she said firmly. "I don't care if we have to scour every remaining city on the planet. I want one perfect moment of normalcy before the universe decides to throw more horror at us." "Deal," I said, offering my hand. She took it, and we shook on a promise that felt more sacred than any oath I'd taken in my military career. The pilot's voice crackled over the comm. 60 seconds to drop zone. Prepare for insertion." The team rose as one, checking gear and weapons with practiced efficiency. The stealth craft's rear ramp lowered, revealing the devastated landscape below, Chicago's ruins spread out like the remains of some ancient civilization, buildings half consumed by Krell organic growth, streets transformed into rivers of alien biomass. And in the distance, rising from the center of the devastation like a tumor, was the Hive ship, a massive, pulsing structure of bioengineered technology that defied human aesthetics, all curves and organic flow, bioluminescent veins glowing with sickly light. We hit the ground running, boots crunching on debris that had once been someone's home, someone's office, someone's life. The insertion was clean, no immediate contact, and we formed up quickly into a tactical column with Aria positioned in the center where we could protect her. She moved with surprising grace through the ruins, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something only she could hear, occasionally raising a hand to signal direction changes when she sensed Krell patrols ahead. The city was a graveyard, transformed into something worse, a living nightmare where human architecture served as scaffolding for alien growth. Fungal masses erupted from broken windows, pulsing with rhythmic contractions like breathing lungs. The streets were slick, with a mucus-like secretion that made every step treacherous, and the air tasted of copper and decay, thick enough to feel in your lungs with each breath. This was Earth, being digested and reconstituted, humanity's legacy consumed and repurposed into something that served our destroyers. We'd been moving for 30 minutes when Aria suddenly froze, her hand shooting up in the signal for immediate halt. The team dropped into defensive positions, weapons trained outward, while she stood perfectly still, with her eyes closed and her breathing shallow. "Large concentration ahead," she whispered, her voice strained. "At least 200 Krell, warrior caste, forming a perimeter around the ship. Their neural network is incredibly dense here, overlapping patterns, redundant connections. They're expecting trouble." "Can you get us through?" I asked quietly, moving closer to her. "Not without alerting them. The network is too tightly woven. Any gap I create will be noticed immediately." She opened her eyes, and I saw frustration there, mixed with fear. "We're going to have to fight our way in. Once I start the disruption, they'll know exactly where we are, and every Krell in range will converge on our position." I'd known this was a possibility, had planned for it even, but hearing it confirmed still sent ice through my veins. Fighting through 200 Krell warriors was a death sentence, even with Aria's abilities giving us an edge. We'd be lucky if half the team survived long enough to reach the ship, let alone plant the charges and extract. "Then we make every bullet count," I said, addressing the team through our closed comm channel. "Rodriguez, you're priority one. You get to that ship core no matter what. Everyone else is running interference and buying time. Jackson, you're with Rodriguez to provide cover. Chen, you stay mobile and keep communications open as long as possible. The rest of you, standard covering fire pattern, leapfrog advancement, and for God's sake, don't be heroes. We only need a few of us to survive long enough to complete the mission." The team acknowledged with grim nods, the kind of silent acceptance that came from soldiers who'd already written their own epitaphs. These were people who'd survived 7 years of hell, and they knew the odds as well as I did. We were about to walk into a meat grinder, and the only question was how much damage we could inflict before it consumed us. "Aria," I said, turning to her, "when you're ready." She took a deep breath, centering herself, and I watched as her entire demeanor changed. The woman who'd joked about ice cream and held my hand under the stars disappeared, replaced by something harder, colder, more focused. This was the weapon she'd been designed to be, the living disruption field that Command had created and then lost control of. Her eyes began to glow more brightly, that violet light intensifying until it seemed to spill out around her like an aura, and the air itself began to vibrate with a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "Now," she said, her voice resonating with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every Krell within a mile radius suddenly jerked as if electrocuted, their coordinated movements dissolving into spasmodic confusion. I could hear their screams, a chittering wail that spoke of minds being torn apart by static and noise. Their precious hive-mind connection shattered into fragments of chaos and pain. They fired wildly, plasma bolts streaking in random directions, their formations collapsing as individual warriors lost all sense of coordination and purpose. "Move!" I shouted, and we surged forward into the confusion. The battle that followed was like nothing I'd ever experienced. We fought through a nightmare of disoriented Krell, cutting them down as they stumbled and shrieked, their weapons firing at phantoms and shadows, while Aria's disruption field turned their greatest strength into a fatal weakness. But even in chaos, they were dangerous. Plasma fire found Jackson's leg, burning through armor and flesh, and one of our heavy weapons specialists took a claw to the chest before we could pull him back. Aria moved at the center of our formation, her face locked in concentration so intense I could see blood beginning to trickle from her nose. The strain of maintaining the disruption field across so many targets was literally tearing her apart from the inside. But she held it, kept pushing, kept the Krell in disarray while we carved a path toward the looming bulk of the hive ship. The ship itself was a horror made manifest, a structure that seemed to breathe, its walls pulsing with internal rhythms, its surface covered in what looked like eyes or sensors, organic ports that wept clear fluid, and entrance orifices that dilated like pupils responding to light. We breached through one of the smaller openings, fighting through a corridor that seemed to contract around us, the walls slick with moisture and warm to the touch, like being inside a living creature's digestive tract. Rodriguez took point, with Jackson limping beside her, their demolition packs heavy with enough nuclear yield to vaporize the entire ship and a significant chunk of the surrounding city. The rest of us formed a protective cordon, fighting off Krell that came at us from side passages and ventilation ducts, their confusion making them less lethal, but no less numerous. "There!" Rodriguez shouted, pointing to a chamber ahead where bioluminescent light pulsed in complex patterns. "That's the core chamber. I can feel the energy signature from here." We pushed forward, every meter bought with blood and ammunition, our casualties mounting as exhaustion and wounds took their toll. Corporal Chen took shrapnel from an exploding Krell weapon, her arm hanging useless, but still maintaining communications through sheer determination. Another soldier simply disappeared, dragged into a side passage by Krell reinforcements we couldn't spare the time to pursue. And through it all, Aria held the disruption field, her body trembling with effort, blood now flowing freely from her nose and ears, her eyes burning so brightly they seemed about to consume her face. I could see her dying in real time, burning herself out like a star going supernova, and there was nothing I could do except push forward and make her sacrifice mean something. We burst into the core chamber, and the sight that greeted us was beyond description. A vast space filled with pulsing organic machinery, nerve clusters the size of cars, blood vessels thick as tree trunks carrying nutrients and information, all centered around a massive crystalline structure that seemed to be both biological and technological simultaneously. This was the heart of the hive ship, the nexus that coordinated Krell operations across an entire continent. "Plant the charges," I ordered, and Rodriguez was already moving, her hands steady despite the chaos, placing nuclear devices at critical junctures while Jackson covered her with his rifle. The charges went active with a series of soft beeps that seemed absurdly gentle given their destructive potential. Rodriguez worked with methodical precision, her training overriding fear and pain, each device calibrated to create a cascading failure that would tear the hive ship apart from the inside. 30 seconds per charge, 6 charges total. And then we'd have exactly 4 minutes to reach minimum safe distance before several megatons of nuclear fire reduced everything within a quarter-mile radius to superheated plasma. "Last one set!" Rodriguez called out, slapping the activation panel. "Clock's running. 3 minutes, 58 seconds. "Fall back," I ordered, already moving toward the exit. "Everyone out now." We ran through corridors that seemed to sense our intent, the ship's organic systems contracting and convulsing as if trying to trap us inside its dying body. Krell warriors, still disoriented but driven by desperate instinct, threw themselves at us with suicidal abandon. I fired until my rifle's magazine clicked empty, then drew my sidearm and kept firing, each shot buying another second, another meter of distance. Aria stumbled, her legs giving out, and I caught her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than she should have been, as if the energy she'd expended had somehow consumed her physical mass. and her skin was fever-hot to the touch. Her eyes had stopped glowing, the violet faded to a dull grey, and when she looked at me, I saw someone who'd given everything and had nothing left. "Can't hold it anymore," she gasped, blood bubbling on her lips. "Networks. Coming back. They'll coordinate. Kill you all." "Then we run faster," I said, lifting her into my arms despite the weight of my armor and gear. "Jackson, take point. Chen, call for emergency extraction. Coordinates to follow." We burst out of the hive ship into the ruins beyond, with 2 minutes 30 seconds on the clock. Behind us, I could hear the Krells chittering, transforming from chaos into organized fury as their neural network reasserted itself. They were recovering, adapting, and in moments they'd be on us with their full coordinated might. The team moved with the desperate speed of people racing death itself, leaping over rubble, sliding down debris slopes, weapons firing backward at pursuing Krell without breaking stride. Rodriguez had taken a plasma bolt to the shoulder and was being half-carried by one of our remaining soldiers. Corporal Chen was running on pure adrenaline, her useless arm flopping with each stride, calling out extraction coordinates between gasping breaths. 1 minute, 45 seconds. A Krell warrior dropped from above, its claws extended, and I couldn't shoot without dropping Aria. It would have killed me, would have ended everything right there. But Jackson appeared from the side with a combat knife, driving it up through the alien's mandibles and into whatever passed for its brain. The Krell collapsed, thrashing, and Jackson stumbled forward with us, his injured leg finally giving out completely. "Leave me," he shouted. "Get the girl out." "Like hell," I growled, but another soldier, Stevens, I think his name was, grabbed Jackson and hauled him up. Nobody gets left behind. 1 minute, 15 seconds. The extraction point was ahead, a cleared space where our stealth craft could swoop in for pickup, but it might as well have been miles away. The Krell were fully coordinated now, firing in calculated patterns, cutting off escape routes, herding us toward kill zones with the precision of predators who'd evolved to hunt in packs. A plasma bolt caught Stevens in the back, and he went down hard, taking Jackson with him. I saw Jackson try to rise, saw him look at me with resignation and acceptance, and then he pulled a grenade from his webbing and rolled back toward the pursuing Krell. The explosion bought us seconds, precious seconds, but cost us a friend who'd survived 3 years of hell only to die buying time for others. 50 seconds. The stealth craft appeared like salvation descending from smoke-filled skies, its pilot performing maneuvers that would have been suicidal in anything less desperate circumstances. The ramp was already lowering as it came in, and we threw ourselves aboard, scrambling over each other in our haste to get clear. "Everyone in?" the pilot screamed over the engine noise. "Go, go, go!" I shouted back, still holding Aria as the craft lifted. Through the open ramp, I could see the hive ship in the distance, already showing signs of structural failure, cracks spreading across its surface like spider webs, bioluminescent fluid gushing from ruptured vessels. 20 seconds. We climbed fast and hard, the pilot pushing the craft beyond its rated limits, distance and altitude our only hope of survival. I found a crash seat and strapped Aria in, then secured myself beside her, my hand finding hers and gripping tight. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. But she was alive, still fighting, still holding on. 10 seconds. "Brace for shockwave!" the pilot called out. The world turned white, even through the craft's armored hull, even through my helmet's polarized visor. The detonation was bright enough to sear after-images into my retinas. The shockwave hit us like a giant's fist, spinning the craft end over end, alarms screaming, everyone thrown against their restraints hard enough to bruise. For a moment, I thought we were dead, that we'd been too close, that the math had been wrong, and we were about to join the vaporized remains of the hive ship. Then the pilot regained control, the craft steadied, and through the viewport I could see the mushroom cloud rising over what had been Chicago, a pillar of fire and destruction that marked the end of the Krell's continental command structure. We'd done it. Against impossible odds, against every rational expectation, we'd completed the mission. The cost had been brutal. Of the 12 soldiers who'd gone in, only 7 came out, and of those, 3 needed immediate medical attention that might or might not save their lives. But the hive ship was gone, and with it, the coordinated Krell presence across North America had been decapitated. Command estimated it would take them months to re-establish control, maybe longer, and in a war of attrition where every day mattered, we'd just bought humanity a future. I looked at Aria, still unconscious, still burning with fever, her body paying the price for the power she'd wielded. The medical readouts on her crash seat were alarming. Neural trauma, cellular degradation, organ stress beyond normal parameters. But she was stable, and stable meant alive, and alive meant there was hope. Colonel Chen met us at Firebase Echo with a medical team already standing by. They took Aria immediately, rushing her to the base's limited hospital facilities, while I gave my after-action report, the words mechanical and hollow, as I recounted who'd lived and who'd died, and how much we'd accomplished with their sacrifice. "You did good, Marcus," Chen said when I'd finished, her hand on my shoulder. "You all did good. The Krell's communications across the continent are in chaos. We're already launching counter-offensives, taking back territory we'd written off as lost. You've changed the course of this war." But I barely heard her. My mind was in that medical bay, with a woman who'd chosen to become a weapon one more time because it meant something, because saving others mattered more than saving herself. 3 days later, Aria woke up. I was there, having barely left her bedside despite orders to rest and recover. Her eyes opened slowly, the violet colour dimmed but still present, and she looked at me with confusion that gradually cleared into recognition. "We made it?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. "We made it," I confirmed. "The hive ship's gone, the Krell are in disarray, and you're being hailed as the hero who turned the tide. They're already talking about medals and commendations." She laughed weakly. "Medals? Great. Can I trade them for ice cream?" I smiled, feeling something tight in my chest finally loosen. "Actually, I found some. Turns out the Firebase commander has a private stash of pre-war supplies. It's not strawberry, but it's chocolate, and it's real." "You remembered," she said softly, and there was something in her eyes that made my heart beat faster. "I made a promise," I replied, "and I don't break promises to people who've saved the world." We shared that ice cream in her hospital room, 2 battered warriors stealing a moment of peace in the eye of an ongoing storm. The war wasn't over. It wouldn't be over for years, yet. But we'd proven something important, that humanity could adapt, could fight back, could turn the tide when everyone had written us off as finished. And more than that, I'd found something I thought the war had killed in me. The ability to care about someone beyond the mission, to see a future that extended past the next battle. Aria had walked into my life carrying her own weight of sacrifice and duty, and somehow, in the crucible of combat and shared purpose, we'd found something worth fighting for beyond survival. "What happens now?" she asked, setting down her empty bowl. "Now we heal," I said. "We rest, we recover, and then we keep fighting. But together this time. No more running, no more isolation. We stand together." She took my hand, that same electric touch that I'd felt on the observation deck, and smiled. Together? I like the sound of that. Outside, the war continued. The Krell would adapt, would regroup, would press their invasion with renewed fury. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more days when survival seemed impossible. But in that moment, holding hands with someone who understood the cost of choosing to fight, I felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years of war. I felt hope.